transcription. Right, hello, we'll get started. Welcome everyone to the second panel today. Quite a packed day, as we said before. And this is a panel on TV and seriality. My name is Rob Watts from the University of Manchester. I'll be chairing this panel today. And we'll get started, the usual format that you're probably familiar with now. We will have 20-minute panels. I'll introduce the speakers in turn before they speak today. And for the speakers, around the 18 minutes mark or so, I may pop my head up and give you a 2-minute warning. And we'll have, hopefully then have plenty of time for questions from the audience afterwards, questions for each other. And as always, please do feel free to use the chat box for that feature or raise your hand whenever you think of a question. So yeah, that's about it. I won't have any further ado here. I think we've got some interesting mix of approaches to the idea of seriality today. So first up is Orcun Can, who is a writer and lecturer at Coventry University. Recently submitted his PhD at King's College London, Department of Culture, Media and Creative Industries. His research focuses on Netflix originals, narrative forms, and he utilises, I think we'll hear about this today, a formal analytical tool called the STNA model. Jan's research maps out different narrative possibilities or SVOD platforms facilitate. So over to you, Orcun.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Okay, let me share the thing first, just so nothing goes wrong.
Yes, before I was going to mention, while you're setting that up, just for everybody in the room, Oliver's presentation is quite widescreen and it may chop off the edges if you don't have a particular view on. So I would encourage everyone to switch to the gallery at the top mode. So if you see the 3 dots at the top of the menu next to the reactions in everybody's individual teams, if you have these, there is an option there that says gallery at the top. If you select that, moving all of our images to the top of the screen, it should make everything visible through all 3 presentations today. So just a little tip there. Anyway, sorry about that. Back to you, Orcun.
Right. So to start off, so as Rob said, I just recently submitted my PhD, and this is a sort of part of a brain exercise for me to try and see how I can disseminate certain parts of the thesis. And the main thing that I was trying to put forward with this thesis was trying to come up with a formal analysis model for television shows and how we can use that in looking at television. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on today. So I'm not really going to give you findings or, you know, the takeaways that I actually had from the thesis, but instead I'm just going to try to introduce the model as best as I can, and just like a door-to-door salesman, I'm just trying to get more people excited about it, basically. But like all good things, I'm just going to start this with a little bit of a story to sort of give you an idea about how this whole thing started. So back in 2017, when I moved to London for the second time to start my PhD, I had booked a hotel room for about 2 weeks while I was looking for a flat to rent. And for these 2 weeks, you know, I had a lot of takeaways, and for the first time in a very long time, I was subjected to broadcast television. So I watched a lot of stuff in that hotel room. There was that one show where landlords were forced to live in place of their tenants for a week to just sort of get a taste of their own medicine. There was this other show, Naked Attraction, where people looked at each other's genitalia. And then at one point, one night, I saw How I Met Your Mother on syndication on E4. And because it was reruns, they were running 3 episodes in a row. More specifically, on that night, they were running season 6 episodes 13, 14, and 15 together. And I watched them all together at night, and it was really an emotional roller coaster for me. I'm going to show you a clip from the very, very end of episode 13, where one of the main characters, spoiler alert, Marshall, gets the news that his father, a really prominent figure in his life, is dead. And so I'm just going to go ahead and share that clip with you for just about a minute. Just a slight trigger warning. It does depict the death of a loved one.
I think the sound's dropped out, Orcun.
No sound.
There's no sound on this, Orcun.
Still no sound?
No. Oh, now there is one.
I think
Okay.
it was muted yourself. I think it's
I
running.
think it's because when I muted myself, it thought I wanted to dismiss all communication. Let me start from the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I love you so much. Can you believe it?
Something's happened. My father, he had a heart attack. He didn't make it.
My dad said. I'm not ready for this.
So after this really emotional ending to that episode, the next episode sees them go into Marshall's hometown, obviously for the funeral, and the whole episode is about the last words that you speak to people and how important they are and everything. And then in the next episode, so the third episode I watched that night, 30 minutes later than this scene, it's the episode that's called Oh Honey. Some of you may know it as the Katy Perry episode, and it opened like this.
Kids, after Uncle Marshall lost his father, he stayed home a while to take care of his mother. The longer he stayed there, the more like he had never left Minnesota. Some residents, Marshall speaking.
Oh, that is too cute. Say it again.
No, it's called manners, jerk. Now, what's going on in New York? Give me something.
Is one thing that it's about Ted.
Kids, as you remember, Zoe and I met because she was trying to save an old building from being torn down and replaced by a new building that I had been hired to design. And yet, somehow, despite this, we all became friends. Which brings us to the night Aunt Robin decided to cook dinner.
I thought the oven was Celsius.
It's okay. We got hot dogs.
But like you can screw up a hot dog.
So I was just there like literally 34 minutes after I've had that devastating news, trying to just make sense of my emotions, and they started making jokes about hot dogs, and I just felt so weird about this experience. Much like Marshall Erickson himself, I was like, oh, I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready for hot dog jokes. I'm not ready for Katy Perry yet. And I thought, like, how could they do it? How could they have gone there so quickly? So I did what every sane person would do. I went and looked at Wikipedia to see when it was actually aired. And it turned out that it was actually during the winter break that they aired these episodes. So actually between the bad news of Marshall's father's death and the definitely not so bad news of Katy Perry, there was 34 days. So it was really ample time for the audience, much like the characters, to grieve and then come back to a sense of equilibrium. And that sort of gave me like an eureka moment, because I was like, huh, well, they really couldn't do this on Netflix if they were just giving us all the episodes. But then that line of thinking turned into, well, how could they do this for Netflix, or how would they be doing that kind of stuff on Netflix? So that really gave way to this whole research for me. Starting from there, I devised some research questions about the characteristics of narrative form in Netflix originals, but more importantly, the possibilities, the possible variations of form and structure that these serials can have when they're exclusively released by Netflix or the likes of it, how paratext play into it, and obviously I looked at temporality. But in order to look at these things, I had to use two different methods. So one of them was the formal analysis to look at these shows, right? So how does the form and structure work? And then the other one was contextual program analysis. You may have seen it in the beautiful television studies book from Jonathan Gray and Amanda Lotz, looking at all of these texts in terms of how they're positioned intertextually with other television texts. But today we're going to focus on that specific formal analysis because I had to come up with an approach to formal analysis for this, because what I was really interested in was that thing that happened with How I Met Your Mother. How could they have done these 3 episodes the way they did, and how would they have done it on somewhere like Netflix? So that meant I had to look at multiple episodes together in a row. And I had to find a way to be able to do that. So I started looking around. One place that I looked around was Steven Johnson's great book, Everything Bad is Good for You, in which he argues that popular culture sort of communally or generationally make us smarter. And because of that, every few decades or so, the artifacts of popular culture themselves get more and more complex, complicated. And in his book, on just one page, while making these arguments, he was using this diagram that shows an episode of Dragnet, Starsky and Hutch, High Street Blues, and The Sopranos. And the diagram is basically showing each row here is a separate plot line, and then each column is like a minute of the episode. So you can see from where it's filled in which minute, which plot line can you see in all of these shows. And he was saying that, you know, we started from something like Dragnet, where it's all just about one thing from beginning to end in the episode, all the way to Sopranos, where you have more than a dozen plot lines, and at any point, at any minute, you can have like 3-4 plot lines happening at the same time. And I thought, okay, that looks like a good way to look at it. I feel like I could use that kind of a diagram and put that for multiple episodes. So with that idea, I started developing a model for formal analysis. I called it the Serialized Televisual Narrative Analysis Model, or the STNA model for short. It basically tries to look at whole seasons of shows. So we're not talking about one episode. We're not talking about 2 episodes. We're talking about full seasons, sometimes full shows. It breaks down narrative into a linear data sheet. So as you can see from that small video here, it puts everything on a data sheet. So the idea is that you will be able to then see the whole season like that. And then it was obviously purpose fit for this project, which I'll tell you how it was purpose fit. Again, I've also used contextual program analysis, but it's not within the scope of this research, this presentation today, but I'm happy to talk more about that too, if anyone has questions. So the first thing to consider in this model was, okay, so Steven Johnson in his diagram just put like, oh, here are plot lines, but didn't even tell what those plot lines were. And I knew that I was trying to look at the whole show. So I was trying to look at all elements. So I needed to an anchor to what these narrative elements that I was looking at were. And I used Seymour Chapman for that, his forms of content from story and discourse more specifically. So I took his events and existence. So I took characters, settings, their characters' actions, and the things that happen to the characters. And I said, okay, great. These elements, the form of content, that's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm putting on my STNA data sheet. Further to that, I've also put a note section on these rows just to look for things that may be peculiar about specific shows. For instance, if a show uses voiceover a lot, great, let me put that in the notes. Or if a show uses recaps or flashbacks a lot, that might be nice to keep track of. So that's what I was thinking. So that was the vertical axis, but then there's the horizontal axis too. So how do I actually talk about that temporality in the datasheet? Because as I said, Stephen Johnson just put these dots without saying which minutes they are. And for a second, I thought about breaking down each episode into minutes, but 1 minute can have multiple different things going on. I talked about scenes, but I can't really talk about scenes without actually seeing the scripts, and the original script to what is seen on screen might be different in the end. So what I decided to then use was this idea of beats, of course, especially used a lot in the American television shows. Each episode has a beat sheet, right? So it's taught in terms of these usually less than 2-minute beats of what's happening next, what's happening next, what's happening next. So what I did was I decided that the horizontal line would be broken down into beats, and I would also tag each beat on in terms of its time code, so I would know exactly where in the episode it was happening. So then the final question I had to tackle was, how do I decide though? How do I decide when a new beat is happening? Because after all, I only have what I see there. I still don't have access to the beat sheet, just like the script. But also, how do I decide when a new narrative element that's put there should be added? Because I certainly cannot be talking, cannot be using all the characters that I see. If a character goes into a restaurant and orders a burger, does that waiter or waitress count as a character if they have just a couple of lines that where they take the order? So in order to have a systematic approach to that, I decided that there would be a set of questions that I would ask every time a new event or existent was seen on screen. And these questions are, does the event or existent recur? Does the event or existent move the story forward and or develop into any other event? Does the event or existent help reveal a character trait or motivation? Does the event or existent foreshadow or recap another event or existent? And I thought that if the answer to any of these questions was yes, then I would just log in that element and the relevant beat change would be put on the SDNA datasheet as well. So with all these consideration, my monster was ready, and I decided to take it out for a spin with Gilmore Girls. So I looked at the first 4 episodes of the first season of Gilmore Girls, and then I looked at the first 2 episodes of Gilmore Girls: A Year in the Life, the Netflix original, and make a comparative analysis about what kind of differences I could see between Netflix and broadcast television. And that resulted in a book chapter in Marieke Jenner's amazing book, Binge Watching in Contemporary Television Studies, which I was very lucky to work with Rob on. But then after that pilot study, once it was iterated, I started doing this for the case studies on my PhD. So I started small. I started with House of Cards. Let's see if this shows. Oh, House of Cards doesn't show. Well, it's definitely not invisible. I know it doesn't show here, but oh, no. Okay. I looked at the first season of House of Cards, so all 13 episodes of it, and I put that in the SDNA datasheet. And then I took a little bit further and I looked at a series of unfortunate events, 3 seasons, 25 episodes, all 3 seasons on the datasheet. So what you see here in its very minimal form is the full data sheets for each season. So any point here that I could zoom in and I would see which beat it is, what is the time code, what characters and settings are there, and what is happening there, or what actions the characters are taking, plus any notes that of anything additional that might happen. And then thirdly and lastly, I looked at Arrested Development. More specifically, I looked at the 3rd season, the final season on broadcast TV, the 4th season, the first season on Netflix, the remixed version of the 4th season, and the 5th and final season, and got this thing. So in the end, I had looked around more than 3,000 minutes of episodes, 60 hours of episodes, 104 episodes in total, to create these data sheets and to aid with my findings for the PhD. So as I said, I'm not going to talk about the actual findings, but I want to talk about what I found out about the model itself. Because as I said, my hope is that hopefully this model can be shared and maybe others can use it too. So the first note is that SDNA model itself is more of a data collection tool than a data analysis tool. So what we put here isn't really about interpreting it by itself, but it's just to give us the grounds to be able to comment on multiple episodes together. The important thing here is that criteria and parameters here are set by the researcher, so it's purpose-built for each project. So any researcher can decide and change the narrative elements they look for instance, or they can decide they're gonna ask different questions instead of the ones that I asked, and sort of fine-tune the specificity of the model for certain projects. So the collection of data is obviously slightly interpretive because it's the researcher asking these questions and answering themselves. But the goal here is really not about objectivity, but more about consistency, because even though they are slightly interpretive, when it's the same researcher that asks the same questions for all the episodes in a season, it will give you consistent SDNA model data. And it works for any serial or audiovisual narrative, you know, from broadcast TV to SVOD originals, all of that. Of course, there are some limitations that come with it too. So while it takes forms of content from Seymour Chapman, it did not take these ideas of kernel and satellite plots from it, or in more industrial terms, the idea of A, B, and C plots. So the SDNA model by itself does not make a comment on which of these plot lines that it's looking at are more prevalent or more important or more significant. Certainly some things can be deducted from the model, but it's not what it does. It can be difficult to use with multiple researchers as they may interpret the criteria of logging elements differently. So I think it works best when it's a single researcher using this model. Some genres translated better into the models than the others. I have seen that Arrested Development was significantly harder to log than something like House of Cards. And I think this is mainly due to the fact that in sitcoms, there are a lot of things that seem trivial or just there for the fun of it, but then they appear to be a part of something bigger, a bigger plot line, or they seem to have a significance. The model is obviously limited to the technological constraints of the software used. So if you were a Mac user and using this on Mac's numbers, Mac numbers can only have 1,000 columns in a row. So it's like something like Supernatural. If you want to do all seasons together, you couldn't do them in a single spreadsheet. It's also a little bit difficult to go back and add an element later on because it's just you have to then go back to which beat it was. You need to make sure that it's in the exact in the correct row. And then lastly, it does not work on interactive narratives on Netflix, which I go into much more detail on the actual thesis, but not here because obviously they're not really the subject of the SDNA model. And then, yeah, that's about it. I think the questions are for the very, very end of this thing, but this is all there is for me. So thank you all for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Orcun. I'm sure we will have questions at the end on that. I love the echo of Raymond Williams' research sprouting from a hotel room experience there as well. Okay, brilliant. Next up, we have Oliver Kroener, who is an independent media scholar from Berlin, Germany. His main research interests are television characters, seriality, and viewer engagement. Most recently, his work on long-term viewer engagement with animated television characters has been featured in the collection Cognition, Emotion and Aesthetics in Contemporary Serial Television from Routledge. And just as I said before, if you have trouble seeing all of the screen, you should be able to see the full width of the screen if you move the gallery to the top in the settings, and the more settings on Teams, for those of you watching it live on Teams here. So hopefully that all works. Over to you, Oliver.
Okay, thank you. when I thought about the theme of this year's CST conference, the first thing that came to mind was TV sports. Despite the fact that sports broadcasts are massively popular with TV audiences, there's still a lack of research on contemporary television sports, I think. And today I'll try to somewhat remedy this research gap by talking about TV sports in the context of transmedia seriality and character engagement. When I originally proposed this paper, I planned to also cover sentimental viewer engagement with characters from sports programs, but as I started doing more research, I quickly realized that this would go beyond the scope of this presentation. So apologies to those of you who expected me to talk about sentimentality today. Let's see here. I will begin the presentation by giving a brief overview of prior studies on TV sports, seriality, and character engagement. And after that, I will use football star Lionel Messi's transfer from FC Barcelona to Paris in the summer of 2021 as a case study to discuss how contemporary sports programs increasingly employ serial and transmedia storytelling to increase the audience's engagement with the characters that are featured on them. Venner and Ganz argue that what primarily distinguishes sports from fictional television genres is that it provides, quote, live and unscripted drama, but one that guarantees resolution, unquote. They further state that following teams or players is an essential aspect of watching sports since it provides viewers with the ideal combination of identification and ambiguity. The audience does not know if their favorite will succeed, which makes it particularly gratifying if they do. Annette Hill has found that with regard to viewer engagement, the genre that perhaps resembles sports most closely is reality TV, since both genres appeal to their viewers by combining constructed storylines that pack an emotional punch with moments of real human experience. Meanwhile, Kafka has highlighted that feeling is one of the main differences between fictional and factual television, arguing that in terms of its emotive function, feeling has no place in information programming. In contrast, fictional programs are largely concerned with eliciting emotional responses in the audience. According to Kafka, as a result of the ongoing tabloidization of television, fictional and factual television have begun to mix. Fictional programs have added a sense of reality to their narratives to increase authenticity, whereas factual programs have adopted elements of fictional television to intensify emotional engagement. The case study that I'm discussing later today can be regarded as a prime example for this kind of tabloidization. Sports broadcasts have, to some extent, always embraced elements of fictional storytelling to appeal to their viewers. For example, in the seminal work on TV sports, Wennell shows that sports programs frequently adhere to the hermeneutic code. That is to say, they introduce narrative enigmas to the sporting events they depict to increase audience engagement. These narrative enigmas don't have to be complex, but can be simple questions that fit in with sports' competitive nature and focus on athletic ability. So it can be questions like who will win or who is the best. In addition, sports broadcasts often fictionalize the events they depict by ascribing a mythological quality to them. Perhaps most famously, Roland Barthes has argued in favor of the Tour de France as a modern epic akin to Homer's Odyssey. Similarly, Wennell states that the ways in which the rivalry between British runners Sebastian Coe and Steve Ovett was rendered in the media during the 1980s purposely recalled, quote, gods, titans, and mythic confrontations, end quote. While these fictionalization techniques are still used today, modern sports programs have also embraced serial and transmedia storytelling, both of which are narrative strategies that are most commonly associated with fictional storytelling. As a result, many of today's sports programs resemble quality or complex television dramas when it comes to their narrative density. Stauff has previously used the Tour de France to highlight this aspect of modern sports broadcasting. Stauff's observations highlight that the narration of modern sports programs increasingly resembles the complex serialized storytelling of fictional television. extends across different types of media, and has changed how viewers interact with sports programs. However, there's not been much research undertaken on how the evolution of sports programs has affected how viewers relate to the athletes that are featured on them. Thus, for the remainder of this talk, I will trace football star Lionel Messi's transfer from Barcelona to Paris and discuss it in the context of viewer engagement. Lionel Messi is widely considered to be one of the, if not the best football player in the world. With FC Barcelona, the Argentinian has won Spain's top football league La Liga 10 times, and the Champions League, which is the highest club competition in Europe, 4 times. Messi has been the top goal scorer of La Liga 8 times and the top goal scorer across all top European football leagues 6 times. With 7 wins, Messi is also the record holder of the Ballon d'Or, which is one of the most esteemed prizes in football. It's annually given out by the magazine France Football to the best football player in the world. In 2020 and 2021, Messi was more featured in the news than usual since contract negotiations between him and FC Barcelona, which is the club that he has been associated with since his youth, unexpectedly broke down. Eventually, Messi left Barcelona and transferred to Paris, and various media outlets referred to Messi's transfer as a soap opera. The use of the term is relevant in the context of this talk, since soap operas are a fictional television genre that is commonly associated with melodramatic, serialized storytelling. Fractures between FC Barcelona and Messi first started to publicly show in early 2020. In February, FC Barcelona's team manager, Ernesto Valverde, was fired. The club's sporting director, Eric Abidal, gave an interview to the Catalan publication Sport, in which he stated that, among other reasons, the manager was let go because some players weren't working hard enough. The following day, Messi publicly responded to Abidal's accusations via Twitter, defending the players and stating that, quote, the sporting direction should also face up to their responsibilities and, above all, take charge of their own decisions, end quote. Messi further demanded that Abidal should name names when making accusations, since otherwise the image of every player would be tainted. In March 2020, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, Messi again voiced his dissatisfaction with FC Barcelona's leadership, this time on Instagram. He confirmed that the club's players agreed to a 70% reduction in pay to combat FC Barcelona's financial losses during the pandemic, but also criticized the club for putting pressure on the players to comply with this drastic pay cut. In August 2020, Barcelona were eliminated from the Champions League after losing 8-2 to Bayern Munich. After this humiliating defeat, the events leading to Messi's departure accelerated within a span of days. Barcelona's manager and the club's sporting director were fired, and Ronald Koeman, one of the club's legendary former players, took over as the new manager. It was reported that Koeman had plans to radically restructure the club, and told Messi that he does not have any privileges within the squad anymore. Upon arrival of the new manager, Barcelona also released a number of star players, including Messi's close friend Luis Suarez. On August 25th, 2020, Messi sent an official letter to the club leadership, informing them of his intention to leave FC Barcelona before the start of the new season. Messi and his legal staff claimed that a clause in his contract would allow him to leave on a free transfer immediately. However, La Liga deemed that the 700 million euro transfer fee that FC Barcelona set for Messi was valid, which essentially forced him to stay in Barcelona for another year, since no football team in the world was willing or able to pay this excessive transfer fee. In September of 2020, Messi gave a candid interview to the football fan site Goal, in which he discussed his problems with FC Barcelona, while also confirming that he was going to remain at the club for another year. At the time of this writing, the video has been viewed over 4 million times. And I would like to show like a 1.5 minute clip from this interview. Hopefully it works. So I'll try to share the Chrome tab now. And unfortunately, I think it does not show up.
You might have to unshare the Prezi first and then reshare it, I think.
Okay, let's see. Just give me 1 second. No, I think it's actually not coming up for me. There's something going wrong. I think I'll just leave it. It's not.
Okay, you sure?
Yeah. Because I think I have to restart Chrome and everything, and it might just take too long. So apologies. It's.
You could pop the link in the chat after the presentation. If you want.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that. Okay, then back to it. See. Okay. So Messi continued to play for Barcelona until his contract expired in June 2021, which officially made him a free agent and allowed him to move to another club without a transfer fee. Throughout the summer of 2021, FC Barcelona kept reassuring the public that although no deal has been finalized, Messi was keen to stay in Barcelona. In August of 2021, the club surprisingly announced that a deal between Messi and FC Barcelona could not be reached since the financial details of the deal violated the rules of La Liga. After giving an emotional farewell at a press conference, Messi joined Paris Saint-Germain on a 2-year contract. Similar to plot lines of serialized television drama, the story of Messi's transfer slowly accumulated over an extended period of time. It began in the summer of 2020, evolved over the course of an entire year, and culminated in Messi's transfer in the summer of 2021. Yet, in true serial fashion, the ending to the story was not definitive. Rather, it functions as what Robert C. Allen has referred to as, quote, mini closure, end quote, by wrapping up one plot line while posing new narrative questions. And in this case, the new narrative questions would be, will Messi be able to repeat his successes in a completely different environment? Or how will FC Barcelona react to the loss of its biggest star player? In addition to its slow build-up and open-endedness, the story of Messi's transfer resembled contemporary complex television in that it unfolded across different types of media, for example, newspapers, fan sites, social media, and television. In addition, it is safe to assume that viewers who followed FC Barcelona during the 2021 season would be caught up on current developments in the Messi transfer saga during the team's weekly games by the commentators. For example, on the German iteration of the international sports streaming service DAZN, the commentary team frequently discussed FC Barcelona's performances in relation to the drama that was unfolding at the club behind the scenes. More specifically, many of Messi's action during games, positive or negative, were filtered through the superstar's assumed feelings and motivations, thus providing viewers with an incentive to tune in on a weekly basis that went beyond FC Barcelona's successes as a team. Yet, as with fictional transmedia stories, those viewers who were willing to follow the story across multiple platforms over an extended period of time would be rewarded with a more comprehensive experience. Messi's departure from Barcelona and eventual transfer to Paris not only played out in serial fashion on a plot level, but it also featured a compelling character arc. Up until the events that led to his departure from FC Barcelona, Messi's public persona had been that of the ideal Barca player. He had spent most of his professional career at the club and emphasized on numerous occasions that he intended to finish his career in Barcelona. Thus, when Barcelona's sporting director criticized the team's players for their attitude, and Messi shifted the blame for lackluster performances to the club leadership, and soon after handed in his resignation, this marked a significant change in attitude for the superstar player. Messi's eventual departure from FC Barcelona can also be interpreted as a plot event that advanced his character arc. In contrast to the previous year, which was dominated by headlines stating that Messi had been forced to stay at FC Barcelona against his will, Messi claimed during his farewell conference that things had changed for him from the previous year. He explained that while he did want to leave in 2020, it was now his wish to stay at Barcelona. Yet the financial regulations of La Liga made it impossible for him to stay. As with the overall story of Messi's transfer, which unfolded akin to fictional plotlines from serialized television drama, the character arc that progressed alongside this plot strongly resembles the sort of character development that television characters from fictional narratives typically undergo over the course of a season. Messi begins his arc as the loyal team captain of FC Barcelona, who has been with the club over 20 years. After a number of disagreements with the management, he wants to leave, but is forced to stay for contractual reasons. In what would be considered a poetic turnaround in a fictional context, Messi then claims that he has rediscovered his passion for FC Barcelona, but this time is forced to leave, again for contractual reasons. The extent to which Messi's transfer from Barcelona to Paris resembles the serialized storytelling of contemporary television drama is relevant since it offers audiences opportunities for viewer engagement that have historically not been associated with television sports. More traditional sports viewers might be mainly interested in the athletic performances of Messi or FC Barcelona. For such viewers, the viewing pleasures that have historically been associated with sports programs, such as identifying with a team or player in the context of an athletic competition in which the outcome is uncertain, might still be dominant. However, as I've discussed over the course of this talk, the serial nature of the story of Messi's transfer also offers viewers opportunities for engagement that are more commonly associated with fictional serial television narratives. The global online reception to Messi's transfer makes clear that viewers were engaged in the story based on a combination of their interest in how the story would resolve, their investment in the player's character arc, and their shared history with Messi. As one viewer in the comments to Messi's farewell conference notes, and I apologize, this is a bit of a long quote, but I think it's relevant, so I'll read it out. "This is a wound that I'm afraid will never heal. Messi was the reason I became a fan of a wonderful club back in '09. Each week I would look forward to seeing him play for Barca. I never imagined I would be here watching this video, only when he retired as a Barca player. My heart is broken, but it is what it is. Life is full of surprises. Only way to deal with it is to move forward and be hopeful. Thank you, Leo, for the wonderful memories you gave me. Thank you for making me a fan, and thank you for all that you have done for this club and its fans. You'll be back, maybe not as a player, but just so you know, we'll be waiting for your return. I guess it's true what they say. Every journey has its end, and what a beautiful journey it has been." End quote. This comment, which is exemplary for many of the responses that can be found in the comment section to Messi's farewell press conference, makes clear that the history viewers share with the character does not only guide viewer engagement with fictional television characters, but also affects how viewers relate to characters from non-fictional TV programs. It would go beyond the scope of this article to examine if long-term viewer engagement with non-fictional TV characters from sports programs leads to specific emotional responses. Yet this overview of the reception of Messi's departure from FC Barcelona highlights the ability of serial storytelling to intensify the audience's emotional engagement with a story and its characters. My analysis of football superstar Lionel Messi's long-forming transfer from Barcelona to Paris in this article has shown that the serialization of non-fictional sports events across different platforms offers sports viewers the opportunity to experience viewing pleasures that have in the past been primarily associated with fictional TV storytelling. Of course, sports programs have always featured serial elements. For example, they've been arranged in tournaments or seasons. However, with regard to viewer engagement, these serial elements have historically been dominated by what might be considered more traditional appeals of watching TV sports, such as identifying with a team or player, or watching them compete in unscripted athletic competition. These viewing pleasures of sports programs still remain intact, but the ongoing trend towards the fictionalization and serialization of non-fictional TV programs provides more options for viewers to engage with their favorite athletes on and off the pitch. More specifically, while some viewers might still choose to engage with sports programs in a more traditional sense, other viewers might get more emotionally invested in the performance of a player based on their knowledge of off-pitch plot lines, their shared history with a player, or their interest in her character arc. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Oliver. And again, questions in response to that at the end after our final paper today, which is Ruth A, who's a reader in Media and Communication at Sheffield Hallam University, where she's also Ethics Chair for the Culture and Creativity Research Institute. She's published widely on topics including social media, celebrity, soap opera, reality TV, gender, religion, fan and audience studies, and ethics in research and practice. She's on the editorial board of Celebrity Studies Journal and has also co-guest edited, special issues of Sexualities and the International Journal of Cultural Studies. So over to you, Ruth.
Okay, great. And hopefully the screen share is going to work. Can everyone see that okay?
Yep, that looks good.
Great. We also have some clips, so we'll fingers crossed that we'll be able to hear them. Okay, so in today's paper, I'm going to be looking at the phenomenon of the soap opera special episode, and in particular, those special episodes that are focused around an issue to do with identity. So soap opera as a genre, we could argue, has become part of what Brett Mills has called invisible television, in the sense that this is the kind of media that is always there, it's always around, and yet because of that, it often garners very little attention, whether through the academy or even through wider media. It's almost taken for granted as a kind of backdrop of the media landscape, rather than something that is often focused on in greater detail. In fact, it's perhaps somewhat depressing that the cancellations of Holby City and Neighbours both received more media attention than soaps tend to get on a regular basis. Harrington argues that perhaps one of the reasons for this is the fact that soaps are so vast. You know, there are several episodes a week in most cases, they don't stop. And so it's a bit of a job to keep on top of everything going on, even for fans. And so for commentators, researchers, journalists, it's even harder to get a grip with the sheer amount of material that soaps produce. And that could potentially be one of the reasons why they're not always paid attention to beyond, you know, their core fan base. So they have to find a way to attract attention. Now, of course, loyal viewers will tune in regularly, but one technique they use is a special episode by which they hope to attract publicity and hopefully more viewers. Now, the concept of a special episode in television is not, of course, restricted to soap. We might think of the tradition of the American sitcom with its very special episode, those episodes that perhaps break with the format or take a more serious approach to deal with a subject like bereavement or racism. But we can also potentially broaden the definition of a special episode and see that it applies across television genres, from everything from the West Wing's 9/11 special to Buffy's musical episode, where TV formats break out of the norm for highlighting a change of format, a change of focus, or something else a little bit different to get the audience's attention. And these may also coincide with a real event like 9/11, COVID, Black Lives Matter, or a media event such as the anniversary of a long-running TV show. Now, soaps have quite a long history of special episodes. For example, most soaps will do an annual Christmas episode, and several will also do a New Year or Halloween episode. These episodes tend to see the culmination or a big flashpoint in major storylines, and often might revolve around a stunt or other big event. Soaps have also run online episodes, late night episodes, straight to video episodes, red button episodes, comedy specials for things like Children in Need and Comic Relief, which has given us such gems as the Doctor Who EastEnders crossover Dimensions in Time. Soaps have also run anniversary episodes where they've centred around big stunts, live performances, or other spectacles. So special episodes and special content is not new for the things I'm going to be talking about today, but I'm going to be talking about a particular trend where special episodes have a focus on issues and identities. I'm looking at anything broadcast on UK TV or radio at the moment, which is predominantly British and Australian soap operas. You'll see Publicum and Home and Away are in brackets, and that's because at the moment I haven't found any examples for either of those soaps of special episodes that fit the criteria, but they may be there. I maybe just haven't found them yet. So what is an identity-focused special episode? Well, anything that has been promoted as a special episode before or after the broadcast in publicity materials or in reviews and commentary. Anything where all or most of the episode is focused on a key theme, and that might be a theme that is told through the lens of one single storyline. So, for example, a special episode of Casualty that focused on paramedic Ian's mental health struggles, or it could be an episode where several storylines are brought together around a key theme, such as an episode of Coronation Street focused on men's mental health through the experiences of several different characters. Many of these special episodes, although not all of them, are format altering, which I'll talk you through in a moment. And I'm looking particularly for those that deal with identity characteristics like gender, race, disability, and so on. Although there is a lot of crossover with issue-based episodes around things like knife crime, school shootings, CSA, domestic abuse, and so on. So it may become more of an issue/identity project. And the practices do vary between soap operas. At the moment, I've been collecting episodes from the last 7 years. They do go back further. And within the set that I have so far, Hollyoaks is responsible for around a quarter of that material. Perhaps because it has a youth-oriented format, perhaps because it's Channel 4's only soap opera, and therefore its kind of main vehicle to deal with some of these issues. And perhaps because historically it's played around with the soap format a lot more than other genres, using things like flash forwards, flashbacks, on-screen captioning, text messages, music, and lots of other slightly non-standard techniques. So you can see here the kinds of themes that come up in the episodes. I'm not going to go through all of these one by one, but they might be connected to events like International Men's Day, International Women's Day. They might be connected to cultural festivals like Diwali or Lunar New Year. They may be as part of a wider initiative, such as Channel 4's Black to Front Black Programming Initiative. And they may just be something that the show has decided to do to highlight a particular issue. Plot-wise, they may mark a key moment in a character's life, a funeral, a wedding, something like that. Or they may be bringing together a range of different characters and plot points. They're also used for deaths, exits, and introductions of new characters. So there are a number of ways that special episodes very often break the format of traditional soap storytelling, and I'm going to show you a few in a second. They might use a smaller or selected cast, a cast of maybe 1, 2, or 3 characters, or perhaps a cast all from one group, for example, an all-female cast in the case of International Women's Day episodes. Sometimes they take place on special locations. They will use technical changes to give us a sense of the character's perception. I'm going to show you some examples of that later. They may alter the credit sequence, the logo, or the theme tune. For example, playing things like the Julia's theme in EastEnders, that famous slowed down theme tune. Many soaps adopt a similar trope for these episodes. They may use non-linear storytelling, including flashbacks. They might embody fourth wall breaking, narration, use of music, and quite often culminate in a celebratory event like a pride parade, a party, a concert, a wedding, or a funeral. So these first examples are some clips from a disability-focused episode of Hollyoaks, which looked at several characters with disabilities, and it kind of focused on different days in the life of each of these characters, and it began and ended with a concert that they were hosting at the cafe in Hollyoaks. And yes, it logged me out of BOB, which was very helpful. Okay, so I'll show you these clips, hoping that the sound works okay. So this narration from long-standing character Jack Osborne serves to set in the text the concert that they're going to be going through, and outside of the text acts as a kind of narrator explaining that the episode is going to be slightly different. We see there clips of some of the characters with disabilities setting up the rest of their day. And at the end, we have a concert.
Not nice.
Kind of ways that music is used, and often we might argue fairly stereotypical music used for inspiration in these scenes. And the culmination of this event is this concert where the deaf child, Oscar Osborne, Jack's grandson, is brought front and centre. And it brings together the storylines that have occurred during the episode. Other format changes that we might see in these special episodes will be the use of guest writers, guest directors, or guest crew members, often from the identity group that the episode is focused on. We might see guest appearances. So, for example, Emmerdale's Pride episode used drag queen the Vivian, Neighbours' Pride episode used Courtney Act and singer Jake Shears. And we may see reference to real life examples or events. So for example, EastEnders' knife crime episode featured a parade of families who had lost people to knife crime in real life. And this was in conjunction with Orcun, one of the leading anti-knife crime UK campaigners, who was of course a former actor on EastEnders. So we have that sort of extra textual knowledge going into their presentation of the knife crime story. These special episodes are also often supplemented with paratextual content. Often there's a content warning by the voiceover announcer before the show, a helpline provided after the show. Sometimes they're done in conjunction with charities, in association with campaigns, and often online materials, podcasts, and resources are provided dealing with the themes of the episode. So I'm going to show you two short clips of format-breaking examples from EastEnders and Casualty. Now, these are both episodes from 2020, interestingly just a month apart, in which we see a day in the life of a deaf character, and Ben Mitchell in EastEnders and Jade Lovell in Casualty. Hopefully this is going to work. The character Jade Lovell meeting her birth mother for the first time, and they have different experiences of being deaf. And throughout the episode, you might have noticed that the sound was slightly different to normal sound quality. At first it's subtle, but then we start to hear things later in the episode, like the screech of the coffee machine that causes interference through Jade's hearing aid, and we start to experience some of the challenges she faces. In the EastEnders episode with Ben Mitchell, there are captions on the screen of what characters are saying, and what we hear is distorted sound, as Ben can only hear some aspects of what people are saying. We also see his vision blur as he tries to take in the soundscape around him. Now, both of these episodes employed deaf crew, and particularly in terms of scriptwriters. One scriptwriter, in fact, worked on both episodes. And in the case of Casualty, they employed deaf actors to play both of those roles, which is not what happened in EastEnders, and also deaf directors to direct it. The next example I want to briefly look at is from Emmerdale, and this is a similar episode to those I've just discussed, but from the point of view of character Ashley, who is living with. This opening sequence establishes that the episode is doing something different. On the outside, we can see Ashley's walking down the street in his pajamas, but when we switch to his perspective, he believes he's wearing clothes. As the episode develops, we encounter who are normally familiar characters to us, but they're played by different actors. He's in a location that looks vaguely like the Emmerdale we recognise, but actually is filmed in old locations that they used to use, so it isn't quite the Emmerdale of the present day. He also goes through experiences of believing his mum is still alive, being confused in his interactions, and we see the other characters struggling to cope with Ashley's altered mental states. This episode, as with those two episodes of EastEnders and Casualty I've just mentioned, garnered a lot of attention and a lot of praise by fans and commentators alike, including by charities. We can see here the Alzheimer's Society praising this episode that has been shot from Ashley's perspective, arguing it gave a representation of what it might be like to live with dementia, although later on they go to acknowledge that, of course, not everybody's experience is the same. And then the last example I'm going to talk about today is from Hollyoaks. And last year, Hollyoaks ran two special episodes focused around Black lives and Black experiences. These were an episode focused on unconscious bias in April, and one as part of their Black to Front Black programming season in September. Now, these episodes came several months after former star Rachel Adedeji had made accusations of receiving racial abuse on the set of Hollyoaks, and speaking about how there were very few Black crew working in the production. As a result, producers Lime Pictures made some statements saying that they were moving into a phase of hiring more Black crew and more Black consultants, as well as more on-screen representation. In addition, they published a series of podcasts where cast and crew spoke about their experiences of being Black particularly around things like racism and unconscious bias. And their unconscious bias episode, which followed a day in the life of character Martine Devereaux as she experiences a series of microaggressions, is so far the only episode of Hollyoaks to date that comes with a director's commentary, which you can watch on YouTube, where actress Kelly Bryan and the writer and director of the episode talk through the episode in the same way that film directors talk through their films on DVD commentaries. How are we doing for time?
Just 2 minutes.
2 minutes, cool, okay. The Back to Front episode was an hour-long special. In this episode, we featured all of the Black characters in the show through different storylines, and they were brought together at the end through a celebratory picnic and barbecue featuring Black music, food associated often with Black Caribbean cultures. And the episode featured characters talking about family, Black history, being queer and Black, and a range of other narratives relevant to the Black experience. Even though some of these characters did not traditionally interact in the average episode of Hollyoaks, they found a way to conveniently bring them all together at this Black barbecue. And the episode was also utilising a Black writer, a Black director, and several Black crew members. Again, these went down very well with the press and the audience, lots of praise for them as being initiatives, although a cynic might argue that perhaps they were, kind of blackwashing the criticisms that had been levelled at them. So to finish then, this is still a work in progress. I'm still collecting episodes and there's quite a lot of them to go through, but these are some of my preliminary observations. While soaps annually celebrate things like Christmas, New Year, and sometimes Halloween, many other events that happen annually in a calendar, so Pride, International Women's and Men's Day, Diwali, things like that, are not celebrated annually in soaps. Indeed, the majority of these annual calendar events have only been celebrated once in any given soap. A couple of soaps have done Pride more than once, but no one has done it every single year. There's also that tricky area of how soaps approach ongoing representations and the embeddedness of Black, disabled, queer characters within the regular day-to-day life of the soap, and singling out issues and identities for special episodes. We might see both advantages and disadvantages to this. Advantages raising consciousness, being able to show different perspectives. Disadvantages being perhaps it's tokenistic, it's othering. And very importantly, we need to think of the context of production. Whilst many of these special episodes utilise crew members from those minority groups, many of these are specialists brought in simply for one episode and are not members of the regular writing, direction or production teams. These special episodes are a way of soaps attracting attention and often praise. They are a way of highlighting their public service commitments to issue raising and representation. But again, they don't necessarily always translate into what's happening throughout the rest of the year. And one final note I want to just leave us on is that soaps are probably one of the main media formats in which we see a diversity of representations in relation to age, gender, religion, disability, race, sexuality, and so on. And yet, both in the wider media and in the academy, we still afford them less attention when we look at representation than we do to other genres. So no wonder that they need special episodes to get us to pay attention to them. That's it, thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. I think appreciation in the room, all of our today. And if we could, I would invite you to turn your cameras on, the panelists as well as those of us in the audience. I think someone, are you still screen sharing, Ruth?
Yeah, how do I stop?
If you go to...
You've done it.
Yeah.
So we disappeared into the vortex of Teams there for a minute.
Yeah, I'm much more familiar with Zoom than I am with Teams. But yeah.
Yes, me too. But yeah, it's not without its gremlins, Teams, every time I've used it. But yeah, no, all went off very well. All really interesting papers there. I would like to open up the room to questions. Please, as I said, use the chat, raise your hand as you wish. Anyone have any questions for all or any of our panelists individually? going to have the slight nobody wants to go first again. Oh, Elka is volunteering to go first. Okay, over to you.
I'm not sure if I'm volunteering, and I'm not sure if I will cover all three papers. But the thing that struck me in a way is, particularly when watching the clips there, was just how much this is about emotion and melodrama, and similarly, you know, Messi, it's all about his breakdowns and crying, and then, you know, Orcun, when you were talking and explaining where you were starting off with, it's again about emotion. You know, it was the emotional dissonance in a way that created that. So I was just wondering if you wanted to say something a little bit about, on the one hand, how does emotion operate in your particular examples? Because on the one hand, I can see how emotion can be disruptive to seriality, but at the same time, emotion is really needed to string the stories along as well. So how can it be disruptive and stringing along at the same time? Does that make sense?
I mean, I can start if you want. It certainly does apply to all three instances, doesn't it, quite clearly? I think in these cases it's interesting because obviously soap is kind of naturally melodramatic anyway, and emotion is part of the day-to-day instances. But I think what they often try and do with these kinds of special episodes is really ramp that up with a view to not only getting in viewers, but also with a view to, we want commentary, we want these, we want soap awards, we want national television awards. You know, there's that kind of going on a little bit in the background, and clearly the use of things like music, playing with cameras, playing with captioning, is often a technique that they're doing to really heighten that and to try and provoke something in you. And I think sometimes that can be effective and sometimes it's milking it. I think the use of "this is me" and something inside in that Hollyoaks episode, kind of milking it to the extreme probably. But yeah, I mean, it's soap's bread and butter, so to make it more emotional, they kind of have to throw everything at it to try and get attention. But I think it's kind of similar in a way to what sitcoms do, but Orcun can say a bit more about that when they try and do these special moments.
Oliver, do you want to maybe say on?
Yeah, I can briefly say something about it. Yeah, I think it's obviously, as you said, okay, the emotion and the melodrama is, like, for my case study, it was obviously very important. So for me, it's more like it kind of worked in that way for that example, that it kind of like added the melodrama, or the type of melodrama that sports can't deliver as easily as kind of like the thrill of competition and these kind of like more established forms of viewer engagement with sports. For me, it's more like that I'm kind of like at the beginning of this, that I curious to find out how it works on sort of like kind of like a bit of a more like subdued level, because as you said, the Messi example was so extreme, like it couldn't have played out any better essentially, or more melodramatic. So for me, the next step would be to look at how does it work with an example that's not as obvious.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. Orcun.
So, I mean, in terms of, very specifically in terms of the model, I wouldn't really be able to comment too much about this, because as it's very strictly formal, it wouldn't really comment that much on the emotions. But in terms of my case studies and everything that I was looking at, especially with what Ruth said about sitcoms, I do think that perhaps in a different sense than the way soaps use it, they sort of use whatever emotional damage they can gather in the audience in their arsenal for very specific purposes, I guess. Because with that, like, introductory example of How I Met Your Mother, I mean, how many episodes is there inside the 145 episodes where you get some form of devastating news? I'm assuming it's less than the fingers of my one hand. I can immediately think of 2 or 3. So yeah,
Is that question Elke, you've added a question about like, is ramped up emotion something of a beat? Is that kind of way in? Do you want to address that in terms of your model of basing it around beats rather than episodes and scenes?
Yeah, that might fit more closely into the model. Yes, absolutely. Because especially when there is a shift in emotion or something big emotionally happens within the same scene, you know, it does not necessarily warrant a change in the scene, but you can absolutely see that the beat is changing. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. There is a question. I'll come to this question in the chat for Orcun in a minute, 'cause it's sort of shifting into a slightly different territory. But I wondered, just Ruth, something you just said then about like the sort of sentiment of it. It reminded me of I don't know if you saw the previous panel where Katie was talking about the different kinds of sentimentality and the ways in which audiences are encouraged perhaps to empathize with certain types of identity, or that's visible in the reaction to these Play for Todays, where certain types of characters reveal different kind of sentiments within the nation, the national response. Have you seen anything like that in these special episodes in terms of the reception to them? Does it reveal something about national sentiment for you?
Yeah, I think so. And it's interesting kind of some of the changes in the reception. So, for example, when Emmerdale did its International Women's Day episode, which was I think 3 years ago, the sort of your Sun, your Daily Mail, your usual suspects were like, oh, this is political correctness gone mad, oh, this is sexist, blah, blah, blah. But then some of the other soaps doing that later was more acceptable, was much less kind of controversial. And then we see this sense of, oh, it's a worthwhile thing to do because they, you know, they gave us this insight into what it is to be deaf, what it is to have Alzheimer's, whatever. And I think there's a whole mixture of stuff going on there. So there's both the kind of, what do we as a culture think about these issues and representations? And it's interesting that the gender stuff was more controversial than the disability representations, for example. And it, you know, I suppose it's also one way of saying, well, we can counter this argument that the media isn't doing enough because, hey, look, they did this one thing that was like brilliant. And if we cover it in the newspaper, then we've done our job too, because we've covered their soap opera and we can share that emotion without us doing our own, you know, articles about being disabled or something like that. But yeah, the sentimentality is a huge part of it. I mean, this use of music and different framing and the emotional characters' faces is a huge part of that kind of manipulation of sentiment and emotion in the audience, and tends to work in terms of how they're received, you know, in the commentary. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question, but...
No, it does. It's great. So this question, we have a question in the chat from Darren and a follow-up from JP for Orcun specifically. But obviously, if it touches on anything about Netflix or the distribution system that the others want to speak to, great, but I'll read it out. So Darren says, for Orcun, what was some of the more striking narrative differences between broadcast and Netflix originals revealed by your modelling? And JP follows with, would also be interested to hear if there are any striking differences in terms of genre. So how do you want to take that on, Orcun?
So the most striking, well, I was expecting there to be a lot of striking differences. I thought that, you know, they were going to be doing a lot of things very differently, and and especially earlier seasons usually showed that. But for me, the most striking thing was actually how there was almost a going back to form kind of thing that was going on. So what I've really seen, especially with things like Arrested Development and A Series of Unfortunate Events, was in earlier seasons you would have like really long beats, and you would have a smaller number of beats because obviously they don't have commercial breaks or anything where they have to keep the audience engaged, right? So so you see things like, if anyone watched the Gilmore Girls, A Year in the Life on Netflix, like there's like a 4 or 5 minute montage of them dancing to a Beatles song, and you just, you know, question every decision you made in your life that brought you to that point because it just goes on for too long. And they do that quite a lot in early seasons of all of these. I mean, Arrested Development has a season where one beat has an episode where one beat itself is 22 minutes long, which is literally the minutes a broadcast television sitcom of its caliber would have. But then as seasons go by, you see them go into shorter beats again and have a longer number of beats. And I think at some point in an interview, Mitchell Hurwitz, the creator of Arrested Development, actually talks about this, says, oh, we realize that maybe people are actually watching television serials for some of these elements that apparently became inherent to them. So some of these constraints that we thought were just there simply because they were on broadcast TV, apparently is now ingrained in the DNA of TV, and it just feels weird when you don't have it. So for me, that was the most striking thing. It wasn't the difference, but it was actually the similarity. A difference that I really enjoyed looking at, because I thought that there was really a lot of different possible variations in the narrative, was the sort of utilization of gaps and the in-betweenness between episodes and seasons. Because again, when they did not have weekly breaks between their episodes or commercial breaks within their episodes, like all of these shows do different things to emulate those kind of gaps for the audience. So they utilize things like the standalone episodes. They utilize short recaps right before the new seasons. Netflix now itself utilizes a weird TikTok-like 10-second funny bits thing called Quick Laughs, I think. So that was quite interesting. And in terms of the striking differences between genres, I think for me, the difference that I could see very clearly was, I don't know if there was like a written thing somewhere in an interview or something, but it looked like sitcoms and usually lighter genres were given almost much more space to experiment with different things. Because not just with Arrested Development, but things like Love, we could see a lot of variation and experimentation with form and structure, and I thought that was quite interesting. But I do have to say that not at a level from what I've seen that does say, hey, there's definitely a big difference between genres. So I hope those answer your questions.
Yeah, and if either of the people who asked the question want to follow up on the microphone or in the chat, I think Darren's typing something in the chat. They're both typing in the chat. Thank you. But if you want to follow up, please do get on the mic and do so. They seem very satisfied with that answer, Orcun. But you mentioned actually that I'll come to Michael's got a question for all of us. But just when you mentioned the standalone episode as a trend with Netflix episode where you see them kind of breaking out the story, I was thinking that during Ruth's paper. And I don't know whether it may just be a stray thought, but I don't know whether you have ever thought about that trend in sort of prestige dramas of, you know, breaking out of the story for a kind of tangential episode. Does it relate to what's happening in soaps, or are these two completely different realms, Ruth?
Oh no, I think they're very similar actually. I mean, there has been some work that I've cited in the presentation looking at that in other genres where they do that. So it is a trend that we see across multiple genres, actually, and in similar ways. I mean, obviously, still slightly within the form of each genre. So a special episode of EastEnders isn't going to look exactly the same as a special episode of The West Wing or Work in Progress or, you know, any other kind of drama comedy. But it is a very similar process of we're trying to break the mold of what we normally do in order to ... you know, raise awareness, challenge the perceptions, whatever that might be. I think the process is very similar. For example, I've been watching the most recent Work in Progress series. If you haven't seen it, kind of very dark comedy, and they had a Black Lives Matter episode where they brought in Black creatives and Black talent, because even though it's a sitcom largely written by and starring a white woman, they brought in this episode to kind of highlight that and shifting their perspective. So you did see the white woman's perspective, but you also saw these black characters and black voices being amplified. And I think that's quite a common thing that we see from genre to genre, even though the style is not going to be the same in every approach. There is, a lot of similarity there.
Yeah, it's interesting how like some of it's to grab attention in the marketplace, some of it's public service kind of raising awareness, and it's interesting to tease out where those two things kind of correspond and where they differ. But that's maybe a thought for a longer Q&A session. I want to get in Michael's question here. You want to ask Oliver a question about sport. I'll Did you want to get on the microphone?
Sorry, I'm critical fail there. Okay, got it. Okay. Yeah, so thank you very much everyone for your papers, by the way. It was a really fascinating panel. But as a football fan, I was really struck by Oliver's paper, because I guess football doesn't really, or sport doesn't get really much of a look in television studies, which is, I guess, why we're here, why we're talking about it. And I was thinking about, I guess, so obviously I think it's useful to think of sports people in terms of characters, individual arcs, but also with something like football, I'd also say maybe soap opera. And if we want to sort of bridge the two, professional wrestling, which is near and dear to my heart as well, it's a story world. It's a massive story world that lasts for sort of decades and decades. And so when I was thinking about the Messi example, like, I think it is a perfect example for many reasons, and one of which is that the Messi story doesn't really start in 2021. It starts, well, maybe in the 70s with Johan Cruyff and the sort of institution of Barcelona as the sort of the perfect footballing institution. And then you can sort of take it to the 2000s and the sort of increasing corporatization of football, and then PSG coming along as this kind of Qatari backed, state funded footballing machine. And then you can maybe pinpoint also them signing Neymar from Barcelona, which was, kind of broke football for a while, kind of inflated the transfer market, but also is this kind of death of football romanticism almost. That why ever would Neymar want to leave the great Barcelona for for oil money, basically. And then sort of 5 years later, this comes back with Messi, who's maybe the symbol of sort of football romance, making that same step. He's leaving, again, the great Barcelona, this beautiful footballing institution that's everything the right way. He did everything the right way. He came through the ranks. He paid his dues. He's arguably the best footballer ever. He's Maradona, he's Pele, he's maybe better than both. And now he's wearing, the Qatari sponsorship. Also prior to a World Cup, which is going to be taking place in Qatar, he's becoming a mascot for that. So again, this is kind of a big ramble, but I'm just wondering if there's a limitation to thinking of character and just like one specific arc, because I think there is a much richer context in which these characters operate. I don't know, that's not really a question, but a ramble.
No, that makes perfect sense. I think I know what you're referring to. So yeah, I kind of picked this example because it is still somewhat contained, right? Because you have this sort of like the transfer as kind of like more of like a contained storyline. But I agree with you that there's like sort of like indefinite possibilities of what you could refer to. Like obviously a lot. It has to do a lot with like long-term viewer engagement and sort of like the shared history that people have with an athlete. So that plays into it. And I think it kind of like, that would be, I think, another next step to look at like what programs, what parts of like the history of a player the programs refer to, how they use them in the current program. And is that different from like, I don't know, does it depend on the cultural background or on the channel and things like that? So I agree with you that it's like basically there's like a lot of options. I picked this example because I thought this was like sort of like an easy way for sports broadcasts to add that sense of melodrama, as I said before, that's not as built into sports. But again, I agree with you. I think there's like there's tons of options to go about it.
Yeah, and I would maybe argue that I guess the long-term engagement and history intensifies the melodrama.
Yeah.
Because again, if Neymar goes to the US rather than PSG, I think that's a slightly different level of emotion. I think it's that sort of the move he's making and the history between the two clubs intensifies that emotion.
Yes.
There's, I guess, the sense of betrayal almost, or disappointment that people felt.
Yeah, and one thing that like what you talked about that I didn't have time to talk about much. What is obviously very interesting, I think, is like sort of like this tension between fiction and non-fiction, right? Because you said you could make it into these like mythological serialized stories, basically. But then you also just it's kind of funny in a way when you like listen to the commentators and they talk about all this Messi drama, like anytime he kicks a free kick, he's probably thinking about the transfer, things like that. but like obviously the games don't always feed into the serialized story that they're trying to tell, so they have to do this dance. As you said, for wrestling, it's obviously all scripted. Then they know that what they say will fit the story. But the problem with like a sport like football is that they're gonna try and to put this like fictional framework on something that is still based on athletic ability.
Yeah, although I guess in the case of Messi, it kind of, his season at PSG kind of fit the narrative because it was, by all accounts, a disappointment. So like he made the wrong move and he's been punished for it. Like it kind of fits. It's kind of interesting. Yeah.
I feel like this is a fascinating line that could go on and on with you.
Yes.
Like you two. I could get a sub room here, but unfortunately we've run out of time. There's so much more I would want to follow up with that. I know Oliver's written about professional wrestling, as have I, so maybe that's a whole sub panel for next year. But and also I wonder if it's possible to use Orcun's model to answer your question, Michael, about whether Twin Peaks is actually narratively a TV series or a piece of cinema. Again, we'll have to park that for now because we've got another panel coming up at 2. But could everybody please show their appreciation for 3 really interesting panels today, I thought, through the applause, either on screen or through the little emojis. Elke, anything